Automatic reference counting, or ARC, is a developer feature that was added with iOS 5 and Xcode 4.2 in late 2011. And I'm going to talk about it here because in my original Objective-C course, ARC did not yet exist. But here's the great thing about it. ARC is not yet another thing to think about, something else you have to learn. It's actually something less to think about, something less to worry about. Because automatic reference counting is not something you do as a developer, it's something the compiler does. You don't have to become an expert on ARC, you just need to know what it is so that you can let it make your life easier. ARC means you will write less code, and the code that you won't have to write anymore is the tedious code you didn't want to write anyway. So automatic reference counting is all about simplifying memory management code. This is the most difficult, the most tedious, the largest cause of bugs in any Objective-C program. And if you learned Objective-C prior to ARC, you know we use reference counting in this language. We create objects using alloc and init or other variants of that, and those objects have a retain count on them. We use the object, and then we better take care of releasing that object once we're done so that memory can actually be reclaimed. Now, with one object and 3 lines of code, this is not a huge problem. But when you have dozens, hundreds, thousands of objects being created and manipulated and passed around, you have to keep track of them all. And you'd have to call retain on an object when you pass it around so they don't get released too soon, and match that with a release call as soon as possible. You really have to envision every possible path through the logic of your app so that the lifetime of your objects can be managed correctly. And this is very difficult to do. There's multiple ways it can go wrong, the 2 classics being that you create an object, you use it, and then you release it too soon. You have something referred to as a dangling pointer. Try and use that after you've released it, you can crash your program. On the other hand, if you create an object and you release too late, or you don't release at all, you are then leaking memory. And the bigger your apps get, the harder this gets. And memory management code is the main reason why a lot of people give up learning Objective-C. It's the main reason apps take longer to develop or don't get finished at all. It's the main reason that finished apps crash, which itself is the main reason why apps are rejected from the App Store. But with ARC, the question of when to retain and when to release pretty much goes away. You don't write release calls anymore. You don't write retain calls anymore. You don't think about it. You create your objects as usual with alloc and init, and you just use them. That's it. ARC takes care of cleaning things up. Because here's the thing. It's not that the idea of retain and release calls have disappeared. It hasn't. Objective-C still uses reference counting. The difference is you don't write the retain and release calls anymore. The compiler does. ARC takes the fact that compilers have gotten so good that anytime you build your project, the compiler, in this case LLVM 3.0, which is what Xcode uses behind the scenes, is able to scan through your code, determine all the possible paths through it, figure out where your objects are being used and where they're not, and synthesize the retain and release calls at the best point in the program. The compiler is effectively generating the same code you would write yourself if you were really, really good at writing memory management code. Okay, you won't actually see these lines. It doesn't physically change your source code files, but this is effectively what it's doing when you compile a project. So with ARC turned on, and yes, you can turn it off, but it is on for new projects by default in Xcode 4.2, you'll never need to write a release call again, never write a retain call again, or an auto-release call. You'll never have to create a dealloc method that's simply full of code to release all the instance variables in an object. That just goes away. Well, not only do you not write this code, with ARC turned on, you can't write this code. You try and write a simple release call, and the compiler will reject it and make you take it out. So for most existing iOS developers, learning ARC is simply learning what you don't do anymore. And in fact, you could take what I've told you in the past few minutes and just make a new project and run with it. You're good to go. That's it. Okay, there are a few other pieces worth knowing. Later in the course, I'm going to talk about some extra things about ARC that might be useful and some gotchas to know about. But you now know the impact of day-to-day use of ARC, which is pretty much, don't worry about these retain and release calls. Create your objects, use them, you're done. And I find the best thing about ARC is that it lets you concentrate your mental effort on your actual problem, on the interesting stuff about your app, instead of the headaches of memory management. Arc is really good at this, and you should be using it in every Xcode project you ever create from now on.